Show. Today is Thursday, April 25th, and today on the Dr. Phyllis Show, we're going to be talking about the issue of domestic violence and how it is spread across the world and affects women in all countries. Our first guest today is going to be author Roxana Ahmad, who wrote the short story, The Spell and Ever-Changing Moon. This story is about domestic violence in Pakistani culture. So let's welcome her to the show. Hi Roxana, we're all so glad you're on the show here today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me, Dr. Phyllis.
So as you know, we're here to talk about your short story, The Spell and Ever-Changing Moon. I've read it and I really enjoyed it, and I know a lot of the audience members enjoyed it as well. So for those of us who haven't read it, will you just explain to us what the story is about?
Yeah. In The Spell and Ever-Changing Moon, the main character, Nisa, is a woman who goes and visits Talat, who is a woman who has magical powers. And she goes to visit her because she's been having issues with her husband, Hamid. And while there, Talat tells her to use her menstrual blood on the first full moon and have Hamad drink it, and this will give her control over Hamad. And Nisa is a little shocked by this, and throughout the entire story she has internal conflict about whether or not to do this. And while she never does, she does discover her inner strength and womanly power by not sleeping with Hamad, which causes him to have domestic violence against her. And it increases throughout the story and gets a lot worse. And in the end, she ends up leaving Hamad.
Okay, well, I'm going to read everyone an excerpt from the story right now, just to show them all the horrible events that happen in the story. So, here's a reading from the story. It says, "She lost her balance, stumbled, and fell to the floor. Her head hit the corner of the wooden chowki and began to bleed furiously. There was a terrible clang as enameled mugs, plates, and bowls rolled off the kitchen shelf. The noise shook Hamid. He pulled himself up and tried to help Nisa up, but she was hysterical. 'No, no, no,' she was screaming. 'Don't you touch me. Don't come near me. I'll kill you. I'll stab you. I'll poison you.'" Can you just elaborate on the word choices and events that happen there?
Yeah, that's towards the end of the story when Hamid's violence starts to get increasingly worse, and that's actually the worst that it gets, is when he knocks her down and actually forces her to bleed. And this is what drives Nisa over the edge to leave him in the end.
Well, as you can see in that reading there, she does stand up to him through her words, and she does finally leave him in the end.
Yes, I wanted to have her leave him in the end because that's not a common theme in the Pakistani culture. Even though domestic violence is being increasingly worse in the culture, many women don't have the choice to leave him. So I really wanted to show that women can have inner strength, and that if they have troubles like that, they can leave and have power.
Right, that's very important, especially in a culture like Pakistan, where they find that this kind of behavior is somewhat acceptable. So, what would you like the final message to be of your short story?
I think it's definitely that women do have the strength, and they are able to leave if they want, and that they don't have to stand for being abused.
Thank you so much. This is just such an important message that everyone can really take something from. So I have the book here, Storywala, short fiction from South Asian writers, and it includes the story, The Spell and Ever-Changing Moon. So everyone in the audience today is going to be going home with a copy of this. All right, well, thank you again, Roxana, for being on the Dr. Phyllis Show today. After our break here, we're going to have another author on. It's short story author Sandra Cisneros. She wrote Woman Hollering Creek, and she's going to come on here after the break and tell us about her short story. So stay tuned. Hi, and welcome back to the Dr. Phyllis Show. As promised, we now have our special guest, Sandra Cisneros, author of Woman Hollering Creek. So let's welcome her on. Sandra, you wrote a short story called Woman Hollering Creek that deals with domestic violence in the Mexican culture. I've read the story, it's incredible, but I would like you to elaborate on the story for those of us that have not read it yet.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, Woman Hollering Creek is about a woman who struggles with domestic violence through her husband. In the story, there's a creek that runs through her town, and she acquires this fascination with this creek because to her it represents her freedom. Eventually, she goes to her doctor for help to escape from her relationship, and towards the end, when she is finally leaving her husband, she passes over the creek, and she gains that freedom that she's always desired, and she knows that everything will be okay.
It's just a great story. I highly recommend it to everyone in the audience. So, in the story, the main character ends up seeking help from a friend. Can you please elaborate on this concept?
Yeah, well, she goes first to her doctor and for a regular visit, and she ends up breaking down, talking to her doctor, and her doctor reaches out to her friend who's helped abused women before, and she just goes and picks her up and takes her to the bus so she can escape from her husband.
Wow. Okay, well, I know some of us in the audience are wondering, how did the character get into this kind of relationship, and how can we ourselves not end up in a relationship such as this?
The character in the story ended up like this because she watched all her telenovelas, which gave her a false sense of romance, and she always longed for that romance. But when she ended up with her husband, obviously she was clouded by it, and it just didn't end up how she wished.
And now I'm going to read to you a little bit from the story, just so you get a better sense of the domestic violence that actually occurs in it. So, he had thrown a book, hers, from across the room, a hot welt across the cheek. She could forgive that. But what stung more was the fact it was her book, a love story by Corinne Tellado, what she loved most now that she lived in the U.S., without a television set, without the telenovelas. So again, that passage right there is just showing how important those telenovelas were to her, and how it kind of broke her heart to see that realization that that's not her real life. Would you agree with that?
Right. It just exemplifies the abuse that was coming from her husband, what influence those telenovelas had on her life.
Well, if an abused woman were to come across this story, do you think that she would be able to use Woman Hollering Creek to help her get out of her situation, much like the main character does?
Yes, I would hope so. I hope it inspires these women to know that it's okay to reach out to people, to ask for help, and to gain that confidence in them so they can escape from these relationships.
Excellent, and I hope your story does help people. So everyone in the audience is going to be getting a copy of International Women's Stories, and this has the story Women Hollering Creek inside of it, and I encourage you to all read it and share it with family and friends. So thank you so much for being on the show. I hope you come back sometime soon. Welcome back to the Dr. Phyllis Show. So next we have a very special guest coming on. Her name is Maria. She herself was in an abusive relationship at her home in Mexico and has since fled to America, has become a citizen here, and is coming on our show to share her story with all of you today. So hopefully educate people more on the issue of domestic violence. So let's all give her a big warm welcome to Maria. So this is Maria, and her last name has been omitted in fear that her abusive husband can come back and find her. She was in a truly traumatic relationship in Mexico. Please share your story with us, Maria.
Well, thank you, Dr. Phyllis, for having me on this show.
Oh, of course.
It makes me nervous being on here, but I know that my story will hopefully inspire other women to learn the things or the signs of being in an abusive relationship and what they need to do to get out of them. I met my husband when I was really young. We were 14 years old, and I thought he was the love of my life. He was the only one that I had been with all my life, and I knew he was the perfect one. We were only dating for about 6 months when he proposed to me, so we
so young.
really didn't know what we were getting into. I thought it was perfect. It was exactly how I always pictured it. He bought me things. He treated me like I was his princess. When we had our first child, we were the happiest we had ever been. It seemed that nothing was wrong, everything was going great, and I wanted to continue to grow our family and have more children so he would be this happy. But with growing our family, he became more and more abusive. He got stressed about finances and just didn't know how he would support our family. Eventually, I saw the kids noticing that that I was being abused, and I didn't want them to think that was normal.
So is that what you would say was the final straw?
Yes, definitely, because I didn't want them to see that it's okay that their mother was being abused. I just wanted to get them out of that environment. I didn't want him to turn to the kids and abuse them and affect them later in life.
Yes, as you can see, domestic violence is truly a toxic relationship for all involved. If the children could see something like that, they would then think that that's acceptable to be in a relationship such as that. So we are all so proud of you for getting yourself out of that situation.
Thank you.
Now, I'm sure some viewers at home are in a situation similar. How exactly did you get out of this, and how can other people in similar situations get out of their relationships as well?
One day I saw an advertisement on TV, and it was for an abuse hotline. And it just got to a point where I was fed up with my relationship. I didn't think that I could handle it anymore. So when my husband left for work one day, I had to go out to a payphone so he wouldn't track our call records. And I called the hotline, and I was really skeptical at first about it because I didn't know if they'd be able to help us, me and my children, if they'd be able to financially support this, and I just didn't know where I was going. But it finally got to a point where when he was out of the house, I packed up my things, packed up my children's things, went to the place where the hotline told me to go. There was a family waiting there for me. They were very welcoming. They taught me job skills that I needed to know, and eventually I came to America, gained my citizenship. My children have citizenship here, and we've just been so much happier living here without my husband.
Well, I'm sure we're all wondering in the audience, how did you let this relationship get to the point that it did instead of just getting out on the first sign of your husband being abusive? Were there any warning signs at all?
Not in mine. I had no idea. I had no idea warning signs or anything like that, and I thought my husband was perfect. I never saw him turning abusive, and I think a lot of women out there, they don't know. Their husbands could turn abusive in a few years. It's just, I didn't know the signs, and I wish I would have. That would have helped me get out sooner.
And you didn't get out sooner because
it was so normal in my life. That's what's taught in Mexico, for the male to be dominant and the wife to be submissive to them.
Oh, and what we've just learned about here on the Dr. Phyllis Show today, we need to stop these cultures from thinking that things like this are acceptable. As you've heard from Maria right here, a true story of this happening in her own life. It could happen to anyone out there, just like it happened to her. So, is there anything else you'd like to share about your relationship, Maria?
I just hope that my story inspires other women to learn the signs and get out of the relationship so they don't have to deal with what I had to go through.
Yes, to all of you in the audience and our viewers at home, if you are in a relationship like this, take Maria as an inspiration, as she truly is. Thank you so much for being here on the show today and putting yourself in danger to share your story with all of us here on the Dr. Phyllis Show. You are truly an inspiration to us all. So let's all thank Maria for being on the show. And then in a little bit here, we're going to have some actors reenact abuse similar to the stuff that Maria suffered in her relationship. It will be truly disturbing, so if you have any children in the room, you might need to ask them to leave the room for this next section here. Wow, as you can see, that is some truly disturbing footage, and that is what women across the globe are going through every day. Maria, was that hard for you to watch?
That was definitely really hard. I had to look away at some points. It was just so realistic to what I went through, and it scares me that I was living that life almost every day.
Well, you've heard it right here. Next, we're going to have on here Dr. Tori Maurer. She's an expert on domestic violence, coming to talk to us about why this problem is worldwide and what we can do to stop it. So stay tuned for this message that I think you can all really learn something from. And we're back on the Dr. Phyllis Show. For this next section here, we're going to switch gears. We have Dr. Tori Maurer. She is an expert on domestic violence across the globe. She's going to come give us some expertise. She's been backstage listening to the testimonial of our abused woman, Maria. She's been listening to the authors tell about the stories they've written. So we're all really excited to hear about her opinions on this really pressing issue. Please welcome her to the show. So, Dr. Maurer, you have heard all of these statistics and the testimonial from backstage. Obviously, it is so sad and touching. First off, is there any comment you would like to give on this issue as a whole and how it has spread across the globe so rapidly?
Yes, domestic violence is a very prevalent problem, and it's growing. The World Health Organization did a study in 2000 to 2003, and in this study they found that 6 countries had a 50 to 75% prevalence of physical and or sexual abuse. So it's a very pressing problem, and I think a lot of people just aren't well informed about the issue.
Obviously, that is so sad to hear. Domestic violence is affecting people all over the world, even here in America. So, is there anything else you'd like to share with us about statistics or findings?
I think that since the 2 short stories that you talked about earlier focus on Pakistan and Mexico, I think that we could focus a little more on them just to relate it back. But in Pakistan, in a village called Karachi, approximately 1/3 of women have been physically abused at least once while they were married. So that doesn't include before they were married or from their fathers or anything, just while they were married.
Wow, that's so sad to hear. Where does this come from? Why is this so prevalent in Pakistan, but yet so ignored?
In Pakistan, it's considered a part of their culture. It's normal to be abused. So collecting data when you go into places like Karachi is very hard because, like in that study, half of the men opted out of taking it or asked for their responses to be terminated just because they see it as so normal. They don't think it's necessary to be asking these questions and collecting this data.
Wow, that's so shocking for us here who do not understand the prevalence of domestic violence in Pakistan.
Yeah, and of the men who did participate in the study and they admitted to slapping their wives, they said that no wife returned the slap at all. And this is because women are normally very financially dependent because they normally don't have their own jobs in the Pakistani culture. So it is very important that they do not cause any rifts in the marriage. So they normally just take the abuse, and it's very sad to see how fast it's escalating in this culture.
Wow, so you've heard it right here. Women being abused, not taking a stand at all. Why are they not taking the stand on this issue?
Well, like I said, it's a lot of the financially dependent issue because they have nowhere to turn. They can't go back to their families. But it's also the fact that it is so normal, so they're even used to it. So even though they may think they don't think it's as big of an issue as we all see it is because we've grown up in this culture where domestic violence is not okay.
Thank you so much for your opinions, Dr. Maurer. All right, so we heard about this story, Women Hollering Creek, set in Mexico. We saw Maria's testimonial, a Mexican woman that has been abused. Please elaborate more on the struggle of Mexican women about domestic violence.
Yes, while domestic violence is common in Mexico, it's not as common as it is in Pakistan, and it's not seen as normal a part of a culture. The main thing in Mexico is the idea of machismo and marianista, which is a culture gender role in Mexico.
All right, well, can you break those terms down for our audience members who may not understand?
Yes, machismo is the idea that the man in the relationship should be macho and dominant, while marianista is the idea that the woman should take on the feminine role and be more passive and submissive.
Now, where does this idea come from?
A lot of this idea is influenced by Mexican pulp culture, and this focuses on men as being very macho, and by being macho and abusing women, they are extremely respected and they are seen as loving to their family, especially to their children. This shows to especially young men that it's acceptable to abuse their wives and that they will become more respected by doing so. This starts a vicious cycle of generations of men who believe that domestic violence is okay just because that's what they see.
Wow, that's just so sad to hear. Do you feel that this pertains to Maria's testimonial she shared with us about her experience with domestic violence?
Yes, I think Maria fits into this perfectly because she's a young woman who has a young husband who has been around this pop culture. He grew up in this culture where it was okay to abuse women, and that it's seen as an okay thing because it makes you seem more loving and that you'll be more respected just by doing this awful thing.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us, Dr. Maurer. We're so thankful to have you here. So you just shared with us the statistics of Mexican domestic violence and really opened the eyes of everyone here in the audience, myself included. So Mexico obviously has this problem with domestic violence along with Pakistan, as you said earlier, many other places across the globe.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you elaborate on this problem and what is this doing to the women of the world?
Yes, as I said, it is a very pressing problem, and that it should not be ignored because some of these women are in grave danger. The Human Rights Council of Pakistan did a study in over an 8-month period of the 372 women that reported the abuse. 272 died as a consequence of the domestic abuse, which is just a startling fact.
That's astounding. You would never think that this domestic violence would cause death like that.
Yes, while domestic violence can lead to death, it usually starts out as a smaller problem. Normally it starts out with some bruising, a broken bone or two, ropes or cigarette burns on the body, welts, or even permanent disfiguration. It can also lead to some mental issues, such as a woman experiencing fear, anxiety, fatigue, post-traumatic stress disorder, sleeping and eating disturbances, and these can last as long-term reactions to domestic violence. So even though the domestic abuse may stop, these mental issues can prevail for the rest of their lifetimes. And if the women do try to hide the domestic abuse from others, like their family members or friends, they can also seem isolated and withdrawn because they bottle up because they don't feel like they can share anything with anybody.
So this abuse can be lifelong damaging for these women, it sounds like.
Yes, it really can. It can affect a woman for the rest of her life, but it can also cause damage to the children. In a study done in Pakistan, approximately 15% of women reported being domestically abused while they were pregnant, which is just an alarming number because this can lead to more miscarriages and a higher number of mental health issues in their children.
Wow, that's just so sad to hear. Not only are women being affected by domestic violence, but their children as well. You don't even think about that when you hear the topic of domestic violence being brought up.
Yes, it's very sad, and it is a very growing problem, and it's becoming a public health concern across the nation, or across the world, really. But this is because it's so accepted and promoted in these societies, like we just learned about in Pakistan and Mexico, that it's just becoming a normal part of their culture and it's being promoted by the culture itself. So I think that we really need to raise awareness about this issue if we want to see a resolution at all to this problem, because women don't know that they can reach out and that it's not okay to be domestically abused.
So true. We need to better educate these countries, and so they learn that it is not acceptable to be treated in that way. We need to stand up for other women and really bond together and put an end to this domestic violence. Thank you so much, Dr. Tori Maurer, for coming on the show today. And all of you guys in the audience, if you look under your seats, you're going to find a copy of Dr. Tori Maurer's latest book, Domestic Violence is Not an Option. So I hope you guys all have a great day, and thank you so much for being on the show. Again, we have had a really great time today, and you've taught us all so much.
Thank you.
Right, so we've just heard from Dr. Tori Maurer. She shared with us her expertise on the issue of domestic violence and how it is really a problem that affects women all over the globe. So I'm going to share with you guys now some of the signs and symptoms of a potentially abusive husband in hopes that you can recognize the way that your husband or boyfriend is treating you and know when to get help or get out of the relationship. So the first one I'm going to share with you guys is excessive flattery or gestures. Like, for example, you heard in Maria's story, her husband proposed to her in a whirlwind romance. He was showering her with love and gifts, promised that he loved her, and that sounds very ideal for many women who want that kind of love. They want that flattery right off the bat. It's what you see in movies. It's what we are taught to accept and really want. So when this happens in your relationship, especially a new one, right away, whirlwind romance, you really need to take those gifts and the flattery and examine them and see really where they're coming from. Is your husband or boyfriend saying these things to you or giving you these presents because he really means them and he's being genuine? Or is he saying that he loves you right off the bat and wanting to marry you because he wants to use this power of him saying he loves you and it makes you feel guilty into doing things for him, or that he has the power to control you, and then with this power he can say, oh, but we're in love, like we're meant to be together, and use that to make you do things that you don't want to do or you're not ready for in the relationship yet. So we see that that's a really common problem out there, and if you're feeling that in your relationship, if you're being told right off the bat that you're made for each other, you're in love, you really need to examine those feelings and potentially wait it out and just see if that's real or if you're just being controlled. So our next symptom is jealousy. If your husband or boyfriend has extreme jealousy, every time you go somewhere, he's texting you, he's calling you, wondering what you're doing, who you're with, what you're doing, that's extreme jealousy and could potentially be a sign that he could abuse you in the future. You need to be an independent woman. You're free to do whatever you want, and he does not need to be checking up on you at all times, always wondering who you're with or what you're doing. He should trust in you, if he really loves you, that you can do whatever you want and you're an independent woman. So jealousy is definitely another warning sign. And I hope that helps all of you out there in the audience and at home as well to identify the relationships you're in and see if they could potentially become abusive. So, changing focus here, if any of you in the audience or at home are in an abusive relationship or have a friend that's in an abusive relationship, there are some things you can do to get out of them or to seek help. As we saw in Maria's story, she used a hotline to help contact the outside world and get her out of her situation. So we have one of those available for all of you guys at home. If you're noticing that a friend of yours has unexpected or unexplained bruising, broken bones maybe, change in personality, we heard all of those symptoms earlier from Dr. Tori Maurer, and if you are noticing any of those signs in your friend or in yourself, you can call the hotline and they can help you and really identify what kind of danger you are in your relationship. So that number is going to be 1-800-799-SAFE. And you can call that any time of day, and there will be people there to help you all the time. They just want to help you, and they're here for you. So feel free to call that number for yourself, for a friend. It doesn't hurt to try and get help. And that's how we're going to end this problem of domestic violence. So Thank you for tuning in today, everyone at home and here in the audience. Thanks for coming. You all are going home with some copies of great books, and thank you again for watching the show and learning more about this really pressing issue. Let's all band together and stop domestic violence. Thanks.